violent offenders, dangerous criminals, and serial unalivers. The most shocking aspects of these cases are not the crime itself, but the ages of the criminals, all in their teens. But their young age did not help them escape justice. Here are the world's most dangerous teens reacting to life in jail. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale. When friends and family members had not heard from Nohema Graber for several hours, they began fearing the worst. Nohema was the local Spanish teacher at a Fairfield high school. In 2021, she was following her daily routine, taking a stroll in the park after finishing up work. However, on this day, Nohema did not return home, and her family began to worry. Their worst fears ended up coming true when police conducted a manhunt and found Nohema's body underneath a tarp along the railways. According to reports, she had been bludgeoned on the back of the head. Nohema was adored by the community, and the crime sent shockwaves throughout Fairfield. But an even bigger shock was yet to come. Who could have hated the 66-year-old enough to unalive her? Police began conducting an investigation and soon found the people responsible for the crime: 16-year-old Willard Miller and 16-year-old Jeremy Goodale, two friends who also happened to be Nohema's students. The question now was why the two minors decided to unalive their Spanish teacher. During interrogations, police uncovered that Willard resented Nohema for marking down his Spanish work, giving him a lower grade, and affecting his chances of getting into a better college. Apparently, he believed that Nohema had ruined his future prospects, and he wanted revenge. On the day of the unaliving, the teen reportedly met with Nohema to discuss his grade, but she maintained that his work deserved what she had marked him. This angered Willard, who then came together with Jeremy, and together the two decided to teach her a lesson. In court, however, Willard claimed that they did not plan on unaliving Nohema, and that they were only acting in anger over the failing grade. Willard tearfully addressed Nohema's family members in court, claiming that he was sorry for his actions, and pleaded with them to forgive him. Nohema's family members rejected the plea, believing that Willard was only sorry he got caught. Willard also pleaded with the judge for a light sentence, stating, "I do not want to be institutionalized for so long that I forget who I am while inside." The defense team also tried to claim that because both teens were only 16 at the time of the incident, they did not fully understand the gravity of their crimes. The judge claimed that evil does not have a birthday, reminding everyone in the courtroom that this was a deliberate attack and that Willard was old enough to know what he was doing was wrong. Taking all the facts into consideration, the judge handed down a life-altering sentence: life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Philip Chisum. Philip Chisum stared blankly into the distance as his defense team tried to plead his case. They argued that he was mentally ill and hearing voices at the time of the crime. Meanwhile, the prosecution argued that this level of heinousness deserved maximum punishment. Friends and family members of the victim, Colleen Ritzer, wept in court as the lawyers went over the circumstances of the crime once again. The 9th grade algebra teacher was stalked, cornered into the washroom, strangled, stabbed, harmed, and then her body was dumped in the woods. On the other hand, friends and family members of Philip just could not believe what he stood accused of. But maybe the most shocking fact of the case was Philip's age. He was only 14 years old when he committed the act back in 2013. According to another student, Colleen had asked Philip and him to stay back after school ended, trying to engage the new kids at the middle school in small talk. Philip had recently moved to Massachusetts from Tennessee, and Colleen noticed his antisocial behavior. The other student claimed that Philip became agitated when Colleen tried to converse with him, after which the 24-year-old changed the conversation. Surveillance footage from the school showed Colleen making her way to the bathroom, followed by Philip, who emerged from the classroom wearing gloves and carrying a box cutter. He entered the bathroom and later emerged with Colleen's body. Philip's defense team did not deny that he unalived Colleen because of the overwhelming evidence against him. Instead, they claimed the insanity defense. A psychologist also testified that Philip was mentally ill and was hearing voices at the time of the crime. Brain scans also showed an altered mental state. However, it did not undermine the nature of the crime, and the judge remarked that it was one of the worst crimes he had ever presided over. The prosecution also argued that 24-year-old Colleen was a beloved teacher, pursuing her dream job as an algebra teacher at the local middle school. The judge sided with the prosecution and agreed that someone as dangerous as Philip should not be allowed back into society. Even during lockup, Philip was accused of trying to unalive a female physician who was assigned to him. This compelled the judge to sentence Philip to 40 years behind bars. His first appeal in 2025 was rejected, and the original sentence was upheld. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. Brianna Gay was a 16-year-old trans girl from Cheshire, England. Her mother described her as a lovable girl who suffered from ADHD and autism and required special tutoring. During her one-on-one classes, she met and befriended 15-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson. Scarlett was a troubled teen who had been expelled from her previous school for bringing and selling substances. According to prosecutors, she became obsessed with Brianna, to the point that she told Eddie Ratcliffe that if she could not be friends with Brianna, no one could. Meanwhile, Eddie was described as a well-liked, overachieving kid who would sometimes detach for weeks on end. In February 2023, Scarlett messaged Brianna, claiming that she wanted to use substances together at the local park. Brianna texted her mother that she would be out to meet Scarlett and left home. Sometime later, Brianna felt suspicious of Scarlett and texted a friend of hers to tell her that something did not add up. Moments later, a couple walking in the same park noticed Scarlett and Eddie hastily leaving the park and someone lying face down in the grass. When they approached the scene, they found Brianna bleeding profusely after she had been repeatedly stabbed with a hunting knife. Emergency responders were called, but Brianna had already passed away. Investigators immediately narrowed down on Scarlett and Eddie, and the two teens were arrested. During criminal proceedings, their defense teams noted both teens' neurodivergence and argued that their case should be heard under special circumstances, hoping that the judge and jury would be more lenient with their sentencing. However, the prosecution showed text messages exchanged between the two criminals, which showed Scarlett's obsession with Brianna and Eddie's homicidal tendencies. It also became apparent that this was not the first time Scarlett had tried to unalive Brianna. Just months earlier, she had given Brianna an overdose of substances, hoping it would unalive her, but she survived. Both teams tried to pin the blame on the other defendant. Eddie's defense lawyers claimed that Scarlett had manipulated him, and Scarlett's defense lawyers claimed that Eddie had always wanted to unalive someone. The presiding judge, however, found both of them equally responsible for the crime, disclosing their identities to the public after much consideration, and sentencing them to a minimum of 20 years in bars before they would be considered for parole. William Riley Gaul. At school, cheerleader Emma Walker and football player William Riley Gaul were described as the perfect couple. The two had dated for 2 years, from 2014 through 2016, and many believed that they were one of those rare couples who would survive out of high school. But things were not perfect, and just a few days after their second year, Emma broke up with Riley. She told friends that she had gotten increasingly concerned over his aggressive behavior and that she was afraid of him. Her worst fears would eventually come true when, in November 2016, Riley had an argument with Emma over the breakup and shot her in the side of the head, unaliving her instantly. According to Emma's friends and family members, their relationship soured once Riley moved for college, and he became increasingly paranoid about Emma's whereabouts. He would also plan elaborate schemes, texting from unknown numbers, pretending that he was kidnapped or unconscious. Things got so bad to the point that Emma's family banned her from seeing Riley, and she told him they were over for good. 2 nights before the unaliving, Riley stole his grandfather's weapon, and then he traveled to Emma's home, firing 2 shots from the driveway into where he believed Emma's bed was located. One of the shots landed in her skull. Emma's mother woke up the next day to find her daughter deceased. Investigators were immediately notified of Riley and Emma's toxic relationship, but they did not have enough evidence to charge him. However, 2 of Riley's friends notified police that he had confided in them earlier that he had stolen his grandfather's gun, the same weapon that police believed was used in the unaliving. They then lured Riley and extracted a confession out of him through hidden microphones. Once Riley admitted to the crimes in front of them, the police arrested him and charged him. According to Riley's defense team, he did not plan on unaliving Emma, but that he only wanted to scare her into rekindling their romance. A day earlier, Riley, dressed in all black, had chased Emma down the street from her home. According to his lawyers, this was to make Emma feel like Riley would protect her. The judge noted how the defense did not take away any responsibility from Riley's crime and only painted him as a toxic ex-boyfriend who could not accept the breakup. The case was widely covered, with many claiming it was a prime example of teen dating violence in the United States. The judge sentenced Riley to a life term with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Tyler Hadley. On July 16, 2011, 17-year-old Tyler Hadley posted a message on Facebook. Party at my place, maybe. He had earlier told a friend that if he was successful in unaliving his parents, Blake and Mary Jo, that he would host a house party. His friend dismissed the statement as a joke. However, on the evening of July 16th, after his parents had returned home from work, Tyler locked the family dog in the closet, stole his parents' phones, and began attacking his parents with a claw hammer. According to investigators, he had also taken 3 pills of illegal substances shortly before the unalivings. Tyler then dragged his parents' bodies into the master bedroom, stole their credit cards, and went on a shopping spree to fund the party. According to investigators, he then invited over 60 people to his house and repeatedly told everyone at the event what he had done. No one took him seriously, but one of his friends reportedly went inside the master bedroom, saw both bodies, and then returned. The friend claimed he was in shock and stayed at the event for 4 more hours before eventually calling the police. The next morning, several other partygoers reported the same incident to the police, and Tyler was arrested. Police soon started piecing together the motive behind his crime. After getting into illegal substances in his early teens, Tyler's parents had repeatedly and unsuccessfully tried to get him help. Shortly before the crime, they informed him that they were looking at inpatient treatment facilities for him. This was reportedly the motive behind the unalivings, as Tyler did not want to be sent to a facility for his substance use. While his defense team tried hard to get him a lighter sentence, the judge noted that Tyler himself had no remorse for what he had done. He would sign autographs of the news articles of his crime from prison and asked everyone to refer to him as Hammer Boy. The judge was disgusted by Tyler's lack of remorse for unaliving his own parents and concluded that there was no rehabilitating him. Tyler was ultimately sentenced as an adult to life behind bars. Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham, teenage daughters and mothers, rarely get along, but Kim Edwards' relationship with her mother, Elizabeth, had taken a dangerous turn. According to investigators, Kim hated her mother to the point of wanting to unalive her. The 14-year-old told investigators that Elizabeth had always favored her younger sister, Katie, and that she believed her mother needed to be eliminated. Kim also claimed that in unaliving her mother, she was doing the world a great service. However, she did not simply unalive her mother, she also unalived her younger sister in the crime, too. Together with her boyfriend, Lucas Markham, the two 14-year-old teens discussed a plan to slash Elizabeth and Katie's throats as they slept in the family's Spalding, Lincolnshire home. According to Kim's journals, she had tried to unalive herself several times. Elizabeth had tried taking the family into family counseling, sought help for her teenage daughter, and forbade her from seeing Lucas. According to records, she was afraid that the two would run away from home. A few months before the crime, they had indeed run away and were located 6 days later, sleeping rough in the woods. Elizabeth sought professional help to improve her relationship with her daughter, but nothing helped. She told friends and family members that all she wanted was to be a better mother for Kim, but nothing seemed to work, and that her daughter resented her. Shortly before the unalivings, Kim had told Lucas that every day at home felt awful and that she wanted her life to end. This led to a discussion where they both decided that it would be better to unalive Kim's family and then run away together. On the night of the unalivings, Kim had snuck Lucas in through the bathroom window. He arrived at the home with a bag full of knives. He then went upstairs where he stabbed Elizabeth and Katie in the throats before unaliving them. The couple then spent the next 2 days at the home, watching television and eating ice cream. Eventually, when police were called by concerned family members and forced their way into the home, they found the teens lying on a mattress in the living room. They readily accepted the crime with no remorse and blamed Elizabeth for pushing them to commit the crimes. The judge who presided over the case was appalled at the circumstances and claimed that the teens' lack of remorse proved that there was no saving them. He recommended the maximum punishment, life behind bars for both of them. Zachary Davis. In 2012, 17-year-old Zachary Davis unalived his mother and set the house on fire while his older brother slept. Emergency responders were able to save his older brother, but Melody was already gone. It was later revealed that she had already been bludgeoned to unaliving by her son over 20 times with a sledgehammer. According to Zachary's defense attorneys, he was mentally ill and had been suffering from chronic depression after his father unexpectedly passed away. The prosecution, however, entered Zachary's journals into evidence, both before and after he was arrested. In the journals, he detailed how he wanted to unalive his mother because he believed she was not taking care of the family properly. Zachary was described as a loner who had stopped interacting with friends and family members. He would spend long hours online, looking up disturbing visuals on the dark web. On October 10, 2012, he decided it was time to unalive his mother. While talking to Dr. Phil, explaining his crimes, he claimed that he did not feel sorry for what he had done and that he was only sorry his mother had suffered before ultimately passing away. In the journal entry, he also wrote that he had intentionally kept his older brother alive to live through the pain of losing their mother. To this day, we do not know exactly what pushed Zachary to unalive his mother, who was described by everyone as a lovely woman. Zachary's defense was rejected after the court found that while he did suffer from some form of mental illness, he was legally sane to stand trial. The court also ruled that some of Zachary's antics, laughing and nodding during questioning and sentencing, were theatrics to make it seem like he was mentally unstable and therefore had limited responsibility. In any case, the judge sentenced him to a life term behind bars. Daniel Bartlam. To this day, no one knows what pushed 14-year-old Daniel Bartlam to unalive his mother, Jacqueline, in 2012. Police responded to the scene of a burning home in Redhill, Nottingham, where Daniel resided with his mother and siblings. They searched through the home to find Jacqueline's body. Her body was badly burnt, to the point that she had to be identified via dental records. Daniel claimed that an intruder had broken into the home, unalived his mother, and then burned the house down. However, he later changed his story, claiming that he lost control during an argument and unalived his mother. The prosecution, however, portrayed a different version of events. They recovered a story Daniel had written on his computer just days before the unaliving. In the story, Daniel plans out the unaliving of Jacqueline using a claw hammer and then burning the home to remove any evidence. Sure enough, Jacqueline was bludgeoned to her unaliving with a hammer and then placed in the bedroom, doused in gasoline, and a fire was started at the scene. The investigating officer called it one of the worst cases she had ever seen. More shocking than the crime itself and Daniel's age was the fact that Jacqueline was remembered as a devoted mother who would do anything for her children. Family members claimed that they had raised their concerns about Daniel after he started displaying violent tendencies, and that Jacqueline was determined to get her son the help that he needed. The court also heard testimonies from family members suggesting that Daniel planned the unaliving after watching the film Coronation Street and being inspired by a teenage unaliver in the film. While prosecutors could paint the picture of how Jacqueline was unalived, no one could answer the bigger question: why? The defense team argued that Daniel was a troubled teen who needed rehabilitation more than lockup, but the judge believed that Daniel's lack of acceptance for his crime showed that he was only sorry he was caught, and sentenced him to 20 years behind bars. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk. When 14-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddart agreed to house-sit for her aunt and uncle in September 2006, it seemed like a normal night. The home, located in Pocatello, Idaho, was quiet, and Cassie invited a few friends over to keep her company. Two classmates, 16-year-old Brian Draper and 16-year-old Tori Adamczyk. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The group watched movies, hung out, and talked like any other group of teenagers. But Brian and Tori had already made a decision that would change everything. Earlier that day, the two had filmed themselves on camera, discussing their plan. They talked about wanting to experience what it felt like to unalive someone, treating it almost like an experiment. As the night went on, Brian and Tori briefly left the house, claiming they needed to get something from the car. In reality, they were preparing. They had brought masks and weapons and had already mapped out how they would carry out the attack. After some time, they returned to the house, blending back in as if nothing had happened. Later that night, after Cassie's other friend had left, she stayed behind with Brian and Tori. At some point, the two teens executed their plan. Cassie was attacked multiple times and left fatally injured. Brian and Tori went back to their camera. They recorded themselves again, this time describing what they had just done. They laughed. They talked about the experience and showed no real understanding of the gravity of their actions. Investigators quickly began piecing the case together. Suspicion fell on the two teens, and once police uncovered the video recordings, the evidence became overwhelming. During the trial, the prosecution focused heavily on those recordings. They argued that this was not a crime of impulse or emotion, but a calculated act carried out for thrill. The defense attempted to highlight their age, suggesting that they did not fully grasp the consequences of what they were doing. The court, however, saw things differently. The level of planning, the execution, and the behavior afterward all pointed to something far more serious. In the end, both Brian Draper and Toria Damic were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Stephen Miles. When 17-year-old Stephen Miles' sister returned home to their Oxted flat in 2014, he told her that Ed had made him do something terrible. It was later discovered that Stephen had unalived his 17-year-old girlfriend, Elizabeth Thomas, and then dismembered her body before throwing parts of her body away in bins across the area. But who was Ed, and why did he compel the teen to unalive Elizabeth? As it would later turn out, Ed was the name Stephen had given to the homicidal voices inside of his head, the same voice that convinced him to unalive Elizabeth that day. The prosecution also revealed that Stephen's attack was premeditated, motivated by his fascination with the American crime series Dexter, where the lead is a police forensics specialist and also a serial unaliver. The court also heard how Stephen's parents had referred him to a mental institution in 2012 following a severe psychotic episode. Friends and ex-partners of Stephen's also revealed that he would repeatedly claim that he wanted to unalive someone, and it was only a matter of time before he fell through on his plan. One ex-girlfriend even claimed that she broke up with Stephen after he tried to strangle her. However, in court, Stephen's defense team argued that he was a mentally challenged teenager who had consumed dangerous content on television. They tried to shift the blame to society's growing fascination with serial unalivers. Even in Dexter, the series lead is seen with a lot of sympathy despite being an unaliver. While the judge was sympathetic with Stephen's position and agreed that young teens had begun consuming a lot of media content that portrayed unalivers in a more positive or fascinating light, it did not undermine the fact that he had unalived and then dismembered Elizabeth. Friends and family members described Elizabeth as a sweet, kind, and outgoing young girl with her whole life ahead of her. The judge ended up sentencing Stephen to 25 years in prison, recommending psychiatric treatment instead of an immediate release when the 25 years were up. Anissa Weir and Morgan Geyser. In May 2014, what started as a simple sleepover between three 12-year-old girls quickly turned into one of the most disturbing cases involving minors in recent history. Anissa Weir and Morgan Geyser had invited their friend, Peyton Leitner, to spend the night. For months leading up to that night, Anissa and Morgan had become obsessed with a fictional internet character known as Slender Man, a faceless, supernatural figure that they believed was real. According to investigators, the two girls convinced themselves that the only way to prove their loyalty to this entity and protect their own families was to unalive someone. The next morning, the three girls went to a park in Waukesha, Wisconsin. They played hide and seek, trying to make everything feel normal. But eventually, they led Peyton deeper into a wooded area. That's where the plan unfolded. Morgan attacked Peyton with a knife, stabbing her multiple times, while Anissa stood nearby, encouraging the attack. In total, Peyton was stabbed 19 times. The two girls left Peyton alone in the woods, believing she would not survive. But somehow, she did. Despite her injuries, Peyton managed to crawl out of the forest and reach a nearby road, where she was eventually found and rushed to the hospital. Doctors later said that one of the wounds had come dangerously close to a major artery. Police quickly tracked down Anissa and Morgan, and during questioning, the motive became clear. This wasn't about anger, revenge, or even a personal conflict. It was about belief. The two girls genuinely thought that committing this act would allow them to become proxies for Slender Man. During court proceedings, both defense teams focused heavily on mental health. The argument was that the girls were not fully capable of understanding reality at the time of the crime. The court ultimately agreed to an extent, and both were found not guilty by reason of mental disease. Morgan was committed to a psychiatric institution for up to 40 years, while Anissa received a sentence of up to 25 years in a similar facility. Jasmine Richardson. Jasmine's family disapproved of her relationship with Jeremy Steinke. Despite the couple's pleas that they were soulmates, Jasmine's parents refused to accept, or even entertain, the idea that the two of them were seeing one another. This was because Jasmine was only 12 and Jeremy was 23 years old. On April 26, 2006, 8-year-old Jacob Richardson's friend had come over to the house for a playdate. He entered the unlocked home and found his friend unalived in his bedroom. Later, police officers found the bodies of Jean-Marc and Deborah in the basement. All three members of the Richardson family had been unalived, and Jasmine was missing. Initially, police feared that Jasmine had been abducted by Jeremy. but they later learned that she had planned the crime with him. According to prosecutors, Jasmine was once an honor roll student who was well-behaved and well-liked. However, she started immersing herself in online goth subculture and started falsifying her age online, pretending to be 15 or older. She eventually connected with Jeremy, and the two began a relationship over their shared homicidal fantasies. Everyone disapproved of their relationship, and the tipping point came when the Richardsons announced that Jasmine was not to leave the house and had all of her electronics taken away for sneaking out to see Jeremy. On the night of the attack, Jeremy snuck into the home, alerted Deborah, who came to the basement, began attacking her, alerted Mark, who also came to the basement, and then unalived both of them. Either he or Jasmine then went upstairs to unalive Jacob later on. Neither of them showed any remorse for their crimes and claimed that the Richardsons had it coming. The two continued to exchange letters to one another while in prison, and Jeremy even proposed marriage to the still underage Jasmine, which she accepted. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Jasmine is believed to be the youngest person ever convicted of multiple unalivings in Canada. Meanwhile, Jeremy was sentenced to life behind bars. He is still incarcerated to this day, while Jasmine has been released and reportedly expressed genuine remorse for her actions. The couple has since broken up. McKini and Devon Ericson. On May 7, 2019, what started as a normal school day at STEM School Highlands Ranch in Colorado quickly turned into chaos. Students were sitting in a dark classroom, watching a movie, when two of their own classmates walked in with a plan that had already been set in motion. 16-year-old McKini and 18-year-old Devon Ericson had come prepared. They brought multiple weapons into the school, hiding them inside a guitar case and a backpack. According to reports, the two coordinated their attack. Devon moved toward the door and pulled out a handgun, telling everyone not to move. At the same time, Alec opened fire from the other side of the classroom. Students were trapped, with shots coming from both directions. In total, one student, Kendrick Castillo, was unalived, and several others were injured. Instead of running away, Kendrick charged at Devon to stop him, sacrificing his life in the process. Other students followed, tackling the attackers and helping bring the situation under control before it could get even worse. As investigators began putting the case together, the motive started to take shape. Reports pointed toward a mix of resentment, isolation, and feelings of being targeted or bullied. Alec, who was only 16 at the time, pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including unaliving. Because of his age, he could not receive life without parole, but the court still handed down a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 40 years, along with additional time for other charges. Devon, on the other hand, went to trial. His defense argued that he had been manipulated and pressured into taking part in the attack. The prosecution pushed back, presenting evidence that suggested planning and intent. In the end, the jury found him guilty on dozens of counts. The judge handed down a sentence that reflected the severity of what happened: life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus over 1,000 additional years. Brian Blackwell. Brian Blackwell was the kind of teenager most parents would be proud of. He was academically gifted, attended a prestigious school, and had secured a place to study medicine at university. On the surface, everything about his life pointed toward success. But Brian was living a completely different reality, built entirely on lies. In the months leading up to the crime, Brian began creating an elaborate fantasy life. He told people, including his girlfriend, that he was a professional tennis player, earning large amounts of money and living a luxurious lifestyle. None of it was true. To maintain this image, he applied for multiple credit cards in his father's name and spent money he didn't have, funding a life that only existed in his head. Everything started to fall apart when his parents began questioning him. They became aware of his spending and the lies he had been telling. On July 25, 2004, that confrontation escalated into something far more serious. Inside their home in Merseyside, Brian attacked both of his parents, first bludgeoning his father with a claw hammer and then repeatedly stabbing both of them with a knife. Then, Brian continued with his plans as if nothing had happened. The very next day, he went on a luxury trip to the United States with his girlfriend, using his parents' money to fund the vacation. For weeks, no one suspected anything. Brian told people that his parents were on holiday and he stayed with his girlfriend's family. It wasn't until neighbors reported a strong smell coming from the house that police entered and discovered the bodies, weeks after the attack. When investigators questioned Brian, he initially denied everything, But as the evidence built up, his story began to change, and he eventually confessed. In court, his defense argued that he was suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, which distorted his sense of reality and fueled his actions. The court accepted that there were mental health factors involved, but that didn't change the outcome. Brian was sentenced to life in prison. Mason Sisk. In September 2019, a quiet home in Elkmont, Alabama, became the scene of one of the most disturbing family crimes involving a teenager. 14-year-old Mason Sisk was inside the house with his family, his father, stepmother, and 3 younger siblings, including an infant. On that night, Mason went through the house while his family was asleep and shot each of them in the head. When police first arrived, Mason tried to distance himself from the crime. He told officers that he had been downstairs playing video games when he heard gunshots, claiming that someone else had entered the home and carried out the attack. As investigators began digging deeper, the timeline didn't add up. Evidence started pointing back toward Mason, and eventually, his version of events began to fall apart. He later admitted to carrying out the shootings himself. Prosecutors described the crime as deliberate and brutal, emphasizing that each victim had been targeted while defenseless. The defense attempted to challenge how the confession was obtained, arguing that Mason had been under pressure during questioning. In the end, Mason was found guilty of multiple counts of unaliving. The judge didn't hold back and described the crime as draped in unmitigated evil, making it clear that this was not a case where leniency would apply. Because Mason was only 14 at the time, the capital penalty was not an option, and Mason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.